Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Morgan,
Yes.
Ms. Swift,
Yes.
Mr. Venable,
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 8 votes in favor of that motion.
By a vote of 8-0, the minutes of September 22nd, 2020 have been approved as presented. Before we begin our public hearing this evening, on behalf of the commission, I'd like to welcome everyone. The commission is charged with reviewing and making recommendations to the city council on a variety of development applications and on plans and policies of the city. Our review includes conducting a public hearing to obtain additional information and comments that could be important in evaluating these items. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting state restrictions on public gatherings, this commission is meeting remotely in accordance with state law. This has necessitated some changes to our normal meeting procedure, and I will take a minute to explain them. 8 commissioners are present at City Hall this evening. Items on the agenda will be heard as normal with a member of city staff presenting a summary of the application, followed by the staff's recommendation. The applicant and those assisting the applicant, all who are attending this meeting remotely, will then be given an opportunity to present information in support of the item. The planning and development staff published and sent notices that solicited the public to provide comments on these items by email, phone, or letter. The commission has not yet received any public comments on tonight's agenda items. The public will have an additional 24 hours after tonight's meeting to make any comments that they wish. The period for public comment on these items will extend for those 24 hours, and I will remind the commissioners to keep an eye on your email inbox. Anything the city receives the next 24 hours will be forwarded to you. At the conclusion of the meeting tonight, instead of an adjournment, we'll recess to Thursday, October 29th at 6 p.m. This will allow the commission to further discuss any additional information or comments submitted by the public before making any official recommendations to the city council. We'll get underway. The first item on the agenda this evening, Robert J. Hunter, Zoning Map Amendment 2018. Mr. Shannon.
Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Chairman. Herb Shannon, Senior Planner with the City of High Point Planning and Development Department. Our first agenda item is Zoning Map Amendment 20-18, a request submitted by Mr. Robert Hunter. This is a request to establish initial city zoning on a 6.8 acre parcel in the northern portion of the city's planning area. This is a general location map. We have Sandy Ridge Road, I-40 to the north, and that area noted in red is the general location of the site in relation to the larger overall map of the city. The site's located along the south side of Tyner Road, approximately 1,300 feet east of Sandy Ridge Road. Excuse me. Currently has a residential single family 40, or R40 zoning in Guilford County. Excuse me. Get a drink of water real quick. Cookie out. Has R40 zoning in the county. This map here shows the city limits in that general area. Those areas you see highlighted in white are areas that are already within High Point city limits. Those areas in gray are still unincorporated lands in the northern portion of the city's planning area. The applicant has submitted a corresponding annexation application that will be reviewed by City Council, but he's requested the establishment of a employment center or EC district zoning on this property to facilitate the development of a warehouse and distribution facility and a minor manufacturing use. This is in the northern portion of the city's planning area, which extends all the way up to I-40 and is designated on the adopted land use map for restricted industrial type uses. This next slide shows a portion of the city's land use map for that northern portion of the city. Those areas that you see highlighted in purple are noted as restricted industrial. So you can see this northern portion of the city is all slated on the adopted land use plan for restricted industrial uses. And since the 1990s, there have been multiple annexations or rezonings in this general area to allow zoning consistent with that restricted industrial zoning or land use designation in this area. This is a blow up of the zoning map in this area. And you'll see Sandy Ridge Road to the west. This is Tyner Road, National Service Road, and Piedmont Parkway. There have been multiple rezonings to conditional use light industrial in this general area. And that light industrial is not, as it seems, it's not just a general light industrial district. Those were granted under the former development ordinance, and they were conditioned that they had to meet the design standards of the former corporate park district. At that time, the corporate park district did not allow as much flexibility as far as building coverage. So what most developers did, they would request light industrial zoning because it allowed more building coverage, but then restrict the use and development to meet the corporate park standards. Under the new development orders, which became effective in 2017, the corporate park district was eliminated. The newly established EC district was adopted for areas designated by the city land use plan for restricted industrial. And this eliminated the need to have someone request conditional use light industrial just to get more building coverage and then have all the corporate park standards. EC is somewhat equivalent to the former corporate park district. So the allowable uses of the EC district includes applicant proposed warehouse distribution and minor warehousing facility. In the EC district, it limits the need for having conditional zoning with a mixture of corporate park and light industrial district. Those CULI districts that are abutting the site to the east are equivalent to the EC district of today's standards. Key to the applicant's proposal for having a warehouse distribution center and minor manufacturing is that those uses are supported by the restricted industrial land use designation and are permitted uses in the requested EC district. And this request is in line with previous zoning approvals granted in this area. Thus, staff is recommending approval to rezone this site to the employment center district. The request is consistent with adopted policy guidance as the land use plan and Northwest area plan designate the area of the proposed zoning map amendment as restricted industrial, which supports warehouse and distribution and minor manufacturing uses. And the request is reasonable and in the public interest as the EC district's allowable uses and its building and site standards are similar and compatible with previously conditional use allied conditional zoning approvals granted in this area. As always, the commission must include in their recommendation a consistency statement, and we do offer that language. That's just a brief summary of this request. Are there any questions of staff at this time?
Any questions for Mr. Shannon? Very well, thank you, sir. In that case, any deliberation from the commissioners? Comments, suggestions? Nothing? Very well. In that case, I'll close the public hearing on this item and ask the commission members to keep an eye on the email box. The public does have another 24 hours to comment on this by sending their comments to the planning and development staff here at City Hall, and that'll be forwarded to you prior to Thursday evening's meeting.
Mr. Chairman, if you just wanted to confirm if the applicant wished to note any comments.
Oh, yes, they're not here and I tend to forget. Is the applicant present? Is the applicant present with us?
He received a Zoom invite, so he was aware of the meeting.
Okay. So I did the right thing to begin with. Okay, we'll go back to where we were. We'll close the public hearing on this item. Commission members, please review any public comments that staff sends you before the meeting Thursday beginning at 6 o'clock, where we will make a final recommendation to City Council. Next item on the agenda will be City of High Point zoning map amendment 20-19.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, zoning case 20-19 is a request by the City of High Point City Council to rezone 817 properties totaling approximately 155 acres as part of the city's comprehensive zoning map amendment project. This request focuses on evaluating various townhome and multifamily developments in the northeastern portion of the city's planning area, specifically that area lying north of West Windover Avenue between Tarrant Road and Morris Farm Road. This is a continuation of this project. You've seen a few of these come through. The purpose of the comprehensive zoning map amendment project is to review and evaluate zoning throughout the city, identify areas where zoning is out of sync with the existing use of land or is inconsistent with the current land use policy, and propose changes to zoning of those areas. This is part of a group that City Council initiated in October of 2019. And this specific proposal for you is for cases that were reviewed between 1994 and 2000 under the former development ordinance. And it's for approximately 7 multifamily developments. There were various conditions included with these developments to address land use policies, road improvements, and to ensure compatibility with adjacent properties. All of these developments have been completed, and the intent is to remove those outdated or obsolete conditions, which either they've met those conditions or specific standards are now governed by the development ordinance. There have been this, just for the public's information, this zoning request is not the result of any proposal for new developments in this area. And I'll briefly go through the various developments that are under consideration. First, we have the Laurel Bluff development that is right here with access directly off of Windover, just south of Tarrant Road. This is a multifamily apartment complex that was annexed in 1994 and received the current zoning approval in 1994 to develop as an apartment complex. They had various conditions dealing with annexation, lot combination, installing a turn lane at the entrance, landscaping, and stream buffers. Those conditions have been met or are now governed by the development ordinance, and the primary purpose of this rezoning request is to remove the conditional use district designation as those conditions from 1994 are either met or governed by the development ordinance. And staff is recommending rezoning the Laurel Bluff apartments from conditional use RM16 to RM16. Are there any questions on this specific development?
Anything for Mr. Shannon? Very well.
Next is Terrence Trace. This is a townhome development located along the west side of Tarrant Road. It's just north of Laurel Bluff right here. On the west side of Tarrant Road, approximately 950 feet north of West Windover Avenue. It was annexed and retained as current zoning in 2000 with conditions regarding allowable uses, right-of-way dedication, installing a turn lane, landscaping, access to the greenway. This development has been completed and the applicant has met all the conditions, and staff is recommending rezoning the Tarrant Trace development from conditional use RM16 to the RM16 district. Any questions regarding the Tarrant Trace development?
Proceed.
Next is the Timberbrook development right here, just across the street from Tarrant Trace. This development has access right here from Tarrant Road. This is a condominium development, Timberbrook. It is noted as per our use standards will be considered multifamily, located along the east side of Tarrant Road, approximately 950 feet north of West Windover Avenue. This was part of a rezoning and annexation in 2002 that had conditions regarding lot combinations, access restrictions, landscaping. The property was developed with this current multifamily condominium development and it met all the conditions. I would note that the adopted conditional use permit included a condition that prohibits access to the site from West Windover Avenue. The Transportation Department wishes to retain that condition. Thus, they desire that the Timberbrook development be withdrawn from this application and retain its current conditional use RM16 district zoning. The planning department would note that establishment of an access point to West Windover Avenue would be difficult. That cost would be borne by the residents of the development. It would not be something that the city would do. And based upon the topography of the site, it's about 10 to 15 feet below Windover, except along the eastern boundary, right up in this area. It's still somewhat below but it's not as steep. That would be the only location where any type of access point could be established. Furthermore, due to the number of trips along this segment of West Wendover, it wouldn't just be a standard driveway. They would have to have a turn lane, which would have a deceleration lane and a storage lane in order to have access at that location. This would also require use of land from the abutting property to the east. You see this area, 2 lots where there's single-family homes highlighted in gray. That area has not been annexed by the city. It's still within the county. Any development of that site would require annexation and rezoning. So because access to West Wendover Avenue is unlikely given those constraints, the Planning and Development Department recommends rezoning of the timber condominium development from conditional use RM16 district to RM16. Are there any questions for the planning staff or transportation staff regarding this specific item?
If they did decide to do something,
Commissioner Juzak.
thank you, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
If in the future somebody did decide that they wanted to do that, the fact that they'd been rezoned to RM16 wouldn't hinder their ability to attempt to do that, would it?
If it is approved and that condition is removed, that access would be allowed. However, they would have to meet all the standards that the City of High Point Transportation Department has. And this is a state maintained roadway, so they will also have to get NCDOT approval. And I have Greg Venable with the Transportation Department. I don't know if you have any addition to add to that.
Yeah, what Herb has explained is accurate. We had discussed this with our director, and he feels that keeping that condition in place as far as no access to Wendover will be best. I know there is limited availability for an access point there, but there is the potential, and we just like to keep Wendover, with the traffic and congestion that's already out there currently. Another access point could only add to that in the future. And if you get rid of the condition, then there'll be no way for us to prohibit access in the future.
Thank you.
Anything else from Mr. Shannon on this particular item? Very well.
Next is the Parkway Village condominiums in Fire Station number 11. That is lying at the northeast corner of Wendover and Morris Farm Drive. This is for a site that was annexed and gained zoning approval in 1995. The northern portion of this tract developed with the Parkway Village condominium development. The southern portion is where City High Point Fire Station number 11 is located. This site has met all the conditions from their zoning approval, which would pertain to lot combination, access, and annexation. Staff is recommending rezoning of this land area from conditional use residential multifamily 16 to RM16. Any questions regarding the fire station and the Parkway Village development?
Doesn't appear to be.
Next is the Riverview development. That's this area here. It has access from Tarrant Road and Marsh Farm Road. And it's a combination townhome development. So you have townhomes here, and a condominium development right there. This project received zoning approval in 1995. It has met all of the conditions requirements as far as landscaping, screening, right-of-way dedication, vehicle access, installation of a turn lane. And staff is recommending rezoning this development from conditional use RM16 to just RM16 district. Any questions regarding the Riverview development?
No, sir. Proceed.
And finally, to the north, you have the Piedmont Trace and Greenwich Ridge development. This was part of a larger tract of land that was annexed and gained zoning approval in 1998. The northern portion of this area developed with the Granite Ridge Apartments. The southern portion developed with the Piedmont Trace Townhome development. This development has met all of their zoning conditions, and staff is recommending rezoning both of these developments from conditional use RM16 to RM16. Any questions regarding those two developments? I would just, yes, sir.
I was just going to, I may be jumping the gun here. The staff, I assume, did not receive any comments from the public on this?
No, we did not receive any.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I would note there were no public comments as of the date, but staff fielded approximately 125 phone calls, not only from those residents, but also when we do a rezoning, we notify property owners within 300 feet. Once we explain what is proposed, there were no objections. Most of the phone calls, there was concern that this was part of some widening of West Wendover Avenue. There were several people who thought that this was part of a change to the school districts. Some property owners had concerns about tax increase, but this isn't changing anything as far as new development area. And there were quite a few people concerned about, will this affect their HOA rules? And staff explained to them that this is just zoning. This has no impact on the HOA rules. So in conclusion, I would note that staff is recommending approval or I'm sorry, Mr. Uzak.
Mr. Usak,
Okay.
maybe it's just a typo or something, but on page 19 of your report, for Piedmont Trace and Granite Ridge, it says that their current zoning is CU-GB, and you're recommending going to CB.
I'm
GB.
sorry, that is a typo.
Just a typo. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for catching that for us. Okay. Staff is recommending rezoning of these developments from conditional use RM16 to the RM16 district. The request is consistent with adopted policy guidance. The proposed zoning map amendments are supported by the medium density residential land use map designation for this area the proposed zoning map amendment are supported by the medium density residential land use map designations for these area as contained in the adopted land use plan. And the request is reasonable and in the public interest as the amendments are needed to remove unneeded restrictions on the properties and to remove the conditional use zoning districts which cannot be amended. That is the summary of this request. Are there any questions in general or on any specific development that we've gone over?
Ray Wheatley, I have a question about the Timberbrook condominiums and the future possibility of them being able to make an entrance. Mm-hmm. If they have to go to the state, is the state just going to say, no, you can't do that? I mean, they have a...
I'm going to let Greg address that.
So if they have to go to the state for that application or that request, and they would review it and make a determination at that time, they could approve it or they could deny it. It just depends on what they find with the traffic volumes and all the information that's provided at the time. So it could go either way. They could approve it or not allow it.
So they could. Yeah. So another question for you is what's the benefit of clearing this up versus, them possibly being able to do it in the future? The other ones sound like pretty easy.
Yeah. Looking at what they would have to go through, staff is of the opinion to be unlikely that those residents would want to pay for an access point at that location.
Okay.
Commissioner Moore, and if they wanted to do that, I mean, it would essentially take agreement by all individual residents, or would there a HOA? It
would be based on whatever their HOA rules dictate far as how they would vote on it and what majority. But it would be up to those residents in their association to make that determination if they wish to pursue that option.
Commissioner Morgan, the two properties to the east, more likely, without zooming in, do you have access to Morris Farm Drive?
No. Let me see. I don't know if I can blow this up. I don't believe I can. But let's see. If you can kind of see right here where I have my pointer at, this corner parcel does not have direct frontage on Morris Farm. There's a long triangular sliver piece of property. They don't have any type of frontage to right at the intersection. So if that area were to come in, first staff would note that both need to come in, not just one. Now they could always contact the Riverview Homeowners Association, which owns that little triangle sliver, and see if they would be willing to purchase it so they can have direct access to Morris Farm Road. That would be preferable. But if they were unable to purchase that, then they would have to look at some type of access from West Wendover Avenue. And that would most likely need to be as far as possible from that traffic signal near that common property line.
State that last sentence again.
It would, any access for this area, if it were to redevelop, would need to most likely be near as far as possible from the traffic, because there's a traffic light there. And transportation would want that as far as possible from that. So it'd probably be near that common property line of this parcel in the abutting Timberbrook development. But that property is currently within Guilford County. If they did desire to do anything of any intensity within the city of High Point, it would require annexation and zoning approval, which would be evaluated by this board and the city council.
A further question on that, Commissioner Kirkman. What access do those two properties have now? Direct to Wendover?
They currently have individual driveway access to those each single family home has a driveway access to Wendover.
And would I be correct in assuming that if a large scale development, something similar just to the Southwest were to go in there, that would change? They would have to, because of the number of vehicle trips, they would have to come up with a different point of access?
Well, they would either need to approach the Riverview HOA and see if they can get that sliver of land to have direct access to Morris Farm, or they would work with the NCDOT and the City of High Point Transportation Department for some form of access to that.
But the access that's presently there, they couldn't simply move in and say, well, we're going to use this driveway for our condo project?
No.
Okay. Very well. Anything else from Mr. Shannon? Mr. Venable?
I just wanted to add one other thing. As you talk about those two parcels there that could be developed. So they could come in and develop that, and potentially the developer could pay the homeowners association to use their property to build that access on the Wendover. So that's another reason why we'd like to limit that. And there is the stub. I'm not sure if that's a stub or not, or if it goes to from the driveway or the parking lot to those parcels. So they can access and get back out through Timberbrook and then come back out to Tarrant Road. So I just like that in there as well.
Very good. Thank you.
What Greg is referring to as far as that stub, one of the conditions when this came through was that they build a driveway to their easternmost property line with the intent of that whenever this area develops, that could be extended to Morris Farm Road. So you can see how that driveway stops right at the property line, that internal drive within that condominium development.
Okay, anything else from Mr. Shannon? All right, thank you, sir. We've heard from the city. Would the commissioners like to deliberate among themselves? Questions, comments on this request? If not, I will close the public hearing on this item and ask the commission members to please review any public comments they may receive over the course of the next 24 hours from city staff. We'll give further consideration and make a final recommendation at the recess meeting, which we will hold on Thursday beginning at 6:00 p.m. First order of new business tonight will be a briefing on the proposed text amendment to the watershed protection standards.
I was trying to get it. Yeah, hold on. Should just be able to escape. There you go. Where's the other one? Let's see. Where's class getting it? Is that it?
No, what he shows on the screen.
Oh, okay.
I did not say anything. I just want to.
Oh, you guys.
The map off the screen. That's all. There's nothing to show. Good evening. We have a couple of text amendments that staff has been working on for a little while. And typically, as our practice, we we bring when it's a large-scale text amendment like the two that we're going to brief you on tonight, this evening. We usually bring it to your meeting prior to, we usually do it in a briefing session prior to the meeting, but with changes in format, we've made it as part of the meeting this evening. I'm going to briefly talk with you a little bit about the watershed text amendment that we'll be presenting to you at your meeting in November. And then Chris will come up and talk a little bit about the wireless text amendment. You have both those drafts that are in the packet. We've released those drafts to the public for public comments. We'll make any final changes and tweaks in any errors or omissions we find in the drafts, and that'll be in your packet for your November meeting. To speak a little bit about the watershed text amendment, the state over the last approximately 2 years has been reviewing their rules. Statewide watershed standards went into effect in 1993. And for any kind of water supply watershed within the state. Since that time, there have been a number of changes to those watershed standards in individual watersheds, as well as some new watersheds that have come online, like Ranneman Lake that went into effect in 2000 when the lake was established. So over that time, you can imagine the state's regulations were different by watershed throughout the state. And so they have taken a period of time to review their rules and try to be more consistent across the board in terms of terminology, in terms of standards. And so some of these changes went into effect at the end of last year, towards the end of last year, and some of these changes have just gone into effect this summer by their rules. And so we're required to amend our ordinance to implement those changes. Most of these changes are non-substantive. Doesn't really they're changes that are changes that affect how things are called, the terminology it's used, but doesn't really change the rules all that much. There are a couple of one substantive and one semi-substantive change, which I'll call out. But for the most part, these are things that we have to do by rule to be in compliance with the state's watershed supply rules. And they are, like I say, very technical in nature. It's particularly if you read through the document, you'll note that there's a lot of verbiage in there that changes from one technical term to another technical term. The first, really substantive change, if any, that's from the state's requirement is really more of a clarification, and that deals with how watershed variances are processed. Watershed variances have been in place since they began the rules back in 1993, but it has always been in question and in doubt as to how the state wanted local jurisdictions to process those variances. Just by the term variance, you'd almost think it would be processed like a Board of Adjustment variance, but their rules did not say that, and the city of High Point traditionally did not process it that way. Their rules now require that a watershed variance be processed by a quasi-judicial body or board, and so therefore the Board of Adjustment would be the appropriate body or board since they are a quasi-judicial body. So this rule change, one of the first changes is changing our watershed variance provisions that are currently decided by TRC and recommended on occasion by City Council will now be decided by the Board of Adjustment. There are also some changes of how they process major watershed variances at the state level. That primarily affects how the state handles their variance process, but it does still involve our Board of Adjustment to a degree as it's proposed. So the real first substantive change is really changing the variance process for High Point such that the Board of Adjustment will handle watershed variances. This is not included. They already handle zoning variances. They also process flood damage prevention variances. And so this will be a similar type of variance as would be the flood damage prevention. As I mentioned, and I won't go in through any amount of detail about, there's a number of procedural terminology and reference changes. But in section 5, there is a local change that we're recommending, and that's dealing with allowing a reduced rear setback for single-family detached dwellings when they abut a dedicated public or common area within a development, such as with a required stream buffer. This is a provision that we had in our prior development ordinance. It allowed for a reduction in lot area as well as a reduction in rear setback. When staff was involved with a consultant in rewriting the development ordinance that went into effect in 2017, we kept out the change with regards to the rear setback. The reason was overall, the city reduced its rear setbacks for single family zones across the board. So we didn't feel like this was going to be a warranted provision that needed to remain in the ordinance. Since then, we've had probably one situation where this would have benefited in a large lot residential zoning district. And so we're recommending to put that provision back in. We don't think it's a provision that will be regularly used because the city has reduced its setbacks, rear setbacks for single family districts across the board. But in some of our larger lot rear single family zoning districts, it would provide, could provide some benefit. We already have the lot reduction provision, which allows a developer to reduce the lot size by about approximately 40% in area when it abuts a common area. So this is a provision because the city requires that the stream buffers be outside lots, and it's sort of a trade-off. The reason is that stream buffers, if they're made a part of a single family lot, they're more likely to be impacted over time. The property owner thinks it's part of their property, and therefore they don't realize there's a stream buffer provision that says you can't remove the vegetation, you can't build on it, and that type of thing. So the city has traditionally required them to be in common area. So this is a trade-off by allowing the lots to be reduced in area, and this now would go back into allowing a setback, a rear setback reduction. That's the only real, and that's a recommended change by staff. That's not a state requirement. The rest of them are state requirements that deal with responsibilities, abbreviations, and definitions, and I won't go into those unless you have some specific question that you may have read thus far. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions, Mr. Burnett, on those? Seeing none, I suppose we'll move on to text amendment on the wireless telecommunications standards.
Good evening, Commissioners. Chris Andrews with the Planning Department. As Lee said, we have included in your packet is the draft of a wireless telecommunications, the wireless telecommunications standards, the text amendment for that. I think one of the first things to note is that many of these changes are driven by changes in state and federal regulations for wireless telecommunications. And so as that has kind of been released by the state and federal governments, we've enlisted assistance with Cityscape, who is a consultant for wireless telecommunications to local governments. And they actually have someone local, so who knows our jurisdiction. And we've been enlisting their help in crafting this ordinance. Staff, we provided a kind of a summary of changes within each section. There are kind of a couple large ones to note, really one large one, and then a couple others to note. Section 8 is where the bulk of the substantive changes are held. Get some notes here. One of the biggest changes, and it's not so much for Planning Commission, but for City Council, is it would be the elimination of a special use permit for a wireless telecommunications facility. So staff we propose eliminating that requirement and adjusting some of our standards otherwise. So that's really one of the major changes. Currently, we have major and minor facilities. We're getting rid of that, or proposing to do away with those classifications and instead just have standards that address, whether it's height or zoning districts, address those items. We've also proposed in there some undergrounding requirements, which are requirements that certain pieces of equipment and structures for these small cell wireless systems be placed underground. And we've worked with both our consultant industry and our city departments to try to make sure that those are appropriate. So. Notes here going forward. Let's see here. So within the ordinance as well, there's note of a new permitting process that's proposed called a wireless telecommunications permit. This is something that we don't currently have, and portions. When a wireless telecommunications provider comes to the city, they may not ultimately or readily know, do I need just a construction permit? Do I need a site plan? Do I need both? And this will allow them to have kind of a single point of contact with our permitting software, and then staff can work with them to make sure that they have all the correct components. But we are, or the state has kind of mandated, or I think it's federal actually, there's a shot clock. We're required to review and approve, or review and really review these items within a certain amount of time. So that's something that helps to streamline this process. And it's something that we would push to have in place at the time that these changes would be adopted with council. But again, that would all be through our permitting software. In terms of the process of the ordinance, we have posted these revisions both on our website, sent them out to our development partners as well as telecommunications partners within the city or within the region. We also sent it out to our staff for review as well, other city staff. And then, an email blast that went out to subscribers with the Build High Point and planning department newsletter, not newsletters, I'm sorry, but the email blast. Notify me, that's what I'm thinking of. So we've been entertaining comments. We did receive a few from the industry partners. So there may be a couple minor revisions, but nothing substantive, just to make sure that we're on the same page. And like Lee said, we're looking for a timeline for this item at your November meeting, and then hope to take it to council sometime in December. Hopefully that first meeting in December. But that's kind of a synopsis. If there's any questions from the commission, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Any questions for Mr. Andrews?
Commissioner Moore, can you just give us some context to the intensity and the volume of these requests and the wireless stations that are in play within the city?
Certainly. So it'll help to also, and we can do this at at your next meeting, is give a background of what some of the different types of structures are, and give definition to those. You may notice them throughout the city. We have the small cell wireless, which are the smaller poles that you might see either downtown, they're around the hospital. I know up on Wendover, there's quite a few. And then we also have items that are called concealed. You may not even know that they're around. They may be flagpoles, they may be hidden. And then we've got the large macro towers. And I don't believe we've had a macro tower recently, but we do have a volume of the small cell wireless structures. There's also a term called co-location, where you might see a tower and there may be multiple providers that have multiple antennas. There's quite a volume of those that come in as well. So they would be utilizing this wireless telecommunications permit. So as far as large and new towers, that may not be as active, but we certainly do have activity with the small cell wireless, and then co-location on whether it's a building or an existing tower.
Thank you.
Let me just add for the longer serving some of the members of the commission. The commission used to hear special use permit applications, and some of you may recall that some of those special use permit applications dealt with cell towers. And particularly when we talk about cell towers, we're typically what Chris is referring to as the macro, the very large ones, the ones that are 100, 200 feet in height and area. As Chris mentioned, there's sort of two types that we're basically dealing with. We're dealing with the macro, which is typically on private property or public lands. And then we deal with what's referring to as a small cell, which are these smaller versions that are about 30 feet in height, typically, that are in the street rights of way. They disguise as lamp posts, or may look like a lamp post, or may look very much like a smaller antenna. We don't have standards for the small cell, so we're having to adopt and put standards in place for the small cell, but we've always had standards for the macro. The issue we've run into over the years is that the discretion that the commission had to some degree when they reviewed and made recommendations on wireless macro towers, and more specifically the discretion that the city council has, is very limited, because between federal and state law, the ability to question the radio frequency waves, the land values, the ability to question the impacts to property owner values has been very much limited through the FCC and through state legislation. And so basically the P&Z, when they were hearing these cases, and more specifically city council, when they do hear these cases now, are very limited to hear the impacts. This has to be handled in a quasi-judicial hearing, not a legislative hearing, but a quasi-judicial hearing where they have to base council has to base their decision based on evidence and facts in evidence. And so the council is very limited and very constrained in their ability to make a decision other than to approve it if it meets all the standards that's in place in the ordinance. So the major substantive change, as Chris was mentioning, is removing the special use permit provision, which basically means is all of them become administrative approvals, staff approvals. Now, in return for getting rid of the special use permit process, the tower height would decrease in residential zoning districts down to a maximum of 100 feet, and they would be required to be concealed. And a concealed tower is one that doesn't look typically like a tower. I'll give you a couple of good examples. If you ever look behind College Village Shopping Center, you'll see a pole sticking up. That pole is actually a cell tower. If you go over off of Hartley Drive near the mall and look behind where, I'm not sure who owns it now, the bank, it was the bank, and was Cornerstone Eye Care, I guess it's Wake Forest Eye Care now, there is a pine tree. That pine tree is a cell tower. We have a few around town. And so what that would mean is if somebody wanted to put up in the future under the proposal as a trade-off of not having to get a special use permit before the city council, they would be able to get administrative approval provided they met the standards. And the standards are going to be a lower height and require that it be concealed. That's the trade-off. So that's probably the biggest substantive change in the proposal that's being affected. And it primarily affects residential districts. It doesn't affect the non-residential zoning districts. But I wanted to make sure that, because I know we have a couple members of the commission that was involved when the special use permit process was coming before this commission.
Very well. Any other questions for city staff? Thank you, Mr. Andrews.
You're welcome.
Before we move to the director's report, which is generally fairly informal, I was informed by city staff that we're going to need a motion and a vote to continue the two public hearing items to Thursday night. If it won't violate any procedural requirements, can we go ahead and do that? I'd just like to wrap up the official business now before we move to the director's report. And do we need two, or can we do both of them with the same two separate motions? All right. In that case, I will move that zoning map amendment 20-18 be continued until Thursday, October 29th at 6 o'clock. If I could get a second.
Mr. Juzak, second.
Mr. Uzak has provided a second to continue the motion, zoning map amendment 2018 to October 29th at 6 o'clock. I'll ask the recording secretary to take the vote.
Commissioners, when I call your name, please answer yes or no in response to the motion to continue ZA 2018 to Thursday, October 29th at 6 p.m. Mr. Uzak.
Yes.
Mr. Kirkman.
Yes.
Ms. McGill.
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Ms. Swift.
Yes.
Mr. Venable.
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 8 votes in favor of that.
Very well. By a vote of 8-0, zoning map amendment 2018 will be continued to our meeting on Thursday evening at 6 p.m. in this room. I will further move zoning map amendment 2019 also be continued to our meeting Thursday night on October 29th at 6 o'clock. We have a second.
Second, Mr. Venable. Second.
Mr. Venable has seconded the motion. I'll ask the recording secretary to conduct a roll call vote.
Commissioners, when I call your name, please answer yes or no in response to the motion to continue ZA 2019 to Thursday, October 29th at 6 p.m. Mr. Uzak.
Yes.
Mr. Kirkman.
Yes.
Ms. McGill.
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Ms. Swift.
Yes.
Mr. Venable.
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 8 votes in favor of that motion.
Very well. By a vote of 8-0, zoning map amendment 2019 will be continued to our meeting, to the continuation of this meeting on Thursday evening, October 29th at 6 p.m. With that out of the way, we'll move to the director's report.
I just had two things to just call to your attention. One is the comprehensive zoning map amendment process. We had one tonight. There'll be another case coming before you at your December meeting. And then that will be all the items out of the round of cases that we got initiated by council last year. And we'll be going to council later this year to initiate another round that'll be coming to you in throughout 2021 or less. That's the plan at this point. Last item just to mention is that your next meeting, we've got one zoning map amendment and the 2 text amendments that we briefed you on. That's all I had.
That it? Are there any other questions or comments from any of the commissioners? If not, I will make a motion that we recess until Thursday evening, October 29th in these chambers at 6 p.m. Have a second?
Second. Commissioner Moore.
As Commissioner Moore has seconded the motion, I'll ask the recording secretary for a roll call vote.
Commissioners, please answer yes or no in response to the motion to recess the meeting to Thursday, October 29th at 6 p.m. Mr. Uzak.
Yes.
Mr. Kirkman.
Yes.
Ms. McGill.
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Ms. Swift.
Yes.
Mr. Venable.
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
Yes.
Votes in favor of that motion.
Very well. By a vote of 8-0, we are recessed until Thursday evening of the 29th at 6 p.m. Again, just keep an eye on your email box for any further public comments that city staff may be forwarding to you. We'll see you then.
Yeah, sure.